Rechecks with me. My name is Mehdi. I'm with Rechecks, and today we are welcoming Charlotte Eaton, who is an advisor on the platform. Charlotte, a pleasure to have you today as part of this Rechecks with me.
Thank you, Mehdi. Thank you.
So we are going to speak about ESG, the latest 2022 trends, and demystify a little bit the ESG topic, because I think that a lot of stuff are said about this topic that are accurate, and a lot of stuff that are a little bit of a little bit complicated and complex for people to comprehend. So we'll try to demystify the topic. But before kicking off, tell us a little bit about yourself, Charlotte, please, and what have you been doing before and what you're currently doing.
Sure. So currently I'm a freelancer. I'm independently employable. I do all sorts of work, actually. I have predominantly in the past focused on banks, but I've branched out recently into the NHS, actually, and have been doing some work with them. My background, however, was in traditional secondary markets banking, and I did that for about 20 odd years, and decided I'd had enough of the 10 till 10 every day. And decided it's time to branch out, do my own thing, which led into a nice segue of not just doing the traditional business management COO related work, but also looking at new themes, new trends, having the freedom to do that. And then that's kind of how I fell into the ESG arena, because that's a hot topic, but it's also an important one for us as individuals as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were speaking earlier, right before the recording about lockdown. Maybe just one note on your experience of lockdown, because it was kind of a big challenge, etc.
Yeah.
Did you notice also a lot of people were trying to as well, in demand during that kind of lockdown, or did you see that the demand when it comes to ESG initiatives and ESG consulting, generally speaking, has actually been reduced during that period?
Yeah, so I think a lot of for independent contractors, I think a lot of us struggled if we'd just finished contracts to find anything new. And I'm aware of a whole heap of people that just kind of went off and did their own thing.
Yeah.
And certainly for me, I decided to continue with teaching some yoga. I've taught yoga in the past, so I decided to resurrect that during lockdown, and offered a lot of pro bono classes to local community, just to help people keep fit, keep mentally fit, and keep engaged with the community. So from my perspective, I went off in a completely different direction for a short time. But then that got me back into this ESG arena, and it's actually opened some interesting questions around sustainability for human beings, the work-life balance, the working from home, where are we heading? And I do think we are definitely heading into a whole new way of working and living, and hopefully interacting with each other as human beings, both in the social sphere and also the professional sphere as well.
Yeah. Well done, by the way, on the pro bono classes, and super cool initiative. So now let's deep dive a little bit into the ESG initiatives, and can you first tell us, in a short, maybe sentence or a few sentences, what is ESG for you today? Because we see a lot of this acronym, and a lot of people are actually saying, okay, what do we put in it? We know that it's environmental, it's social governance, but what do we put in it really? Is it an initiative that is usually contained in one department? Is it an initiative that should be usually launched by the executive or the executive committee of a company or board? What is the ESG, and what do you put in it?
So it's an interesting one. It depends very much on the size of the company, the type of company. You've got, some bigger players, the more established players that have their own CSR departments, corporate social responsibility, which is one aspect. That's the business's ethical state of affairs and what they do as a business rather than what they invest in. But then obviously the bigger banks will have ESG departments. It tends to be the smaller companies who are really struggling with it. And they are the ones that are on the coalface dealing with the end users, i.e. the investors, the asset owners, who want some assurance that their investments are being invested into assets that are credible, that are of an ethical nature, of a sustainable nature. And so that take away from the big companies, you focus on the asset manager, even pension funds as well. The members obviously drive where they want their money to go. You see a lot of companies, not so small companies, who are doing their ESG integration off the side of a desk. They're using their marketing support people rather than a dedicated ESG body. They're using their compliance officers. Again, that's not the best use of time.
Yeah.
They're using regulatory experts as well. They might have a regulatory project manager. Oh, we'll rope them in. And it's done by a mix of people. Rather than having a dedicated person or a dedicated team, they're using a plethora of folks who don't really have any experience, who are just kind of piecing this together on the side of the desk, which obviously isn't the best way forward, because it is, it's nascent stages. There's not really technology there to support it. If you want to build your own technology, or if you want to purchase that technology, you have to build it yourself, your own analytics platforms. Yes, you can use the data from the ratings agencies, but it is about, you need that expertise to bring that data in, put it into a platform, combine it with your own proprietary information and knowledge and research. And then you've also got to have somebody that can then manage the process, not just the data processing, but also the decision-making process, because it is effectively ESG integration is a decision process. It's an investment decision process. But it scales everything from, your back office staff that might be doing the reporting on the assets, on the investable universe, through to your tech folks who are expected to find a way to bring the data in. So it's not really evolved the way it should have done in asset managers. And I think there's potentially a lot of room in that space to help folks, because there aren't that many able-bodied people that truly understand, how do you integrate ESG? What is it? What do I do with these reports? So yeah, it's definitely an area that there's so much more growth, more growth.
And I've been reading a lot about the different ESG initiatives, and I've seen that it does cater sometimes to a lot of different needs. Top line growth, cost reductions, investment and asset optimization, you mentioned it earlier, productivity, etc. Who is the initiator? Who is the owner usually of this initiative? Sorry, the owner of the initiative when it comes to implementing an ESG initiative within a big company. Who is usually the owner? Is it something that is top down, or is it something that is mostly would come from, I would say, the middle management or as well?
It's very much top down, because this is something that is coming from the board, right? There are lots of drivers, as you mentioned. There's regulatory pressure. There's client demand. That's the key thing. So there will be some pressure coming in on the client-facing side as well. There's definitely the client demand. There's this concern around fiduciary duty as well, which is one that is a big element of debate. Most times you might need to minimize your returns, as it were, if you want to invest in sustainable assets. You're minimizing in the short term, right? But in the long term, you're hoping that you're going to get a bigger return. And I think with that pressure, you've got the client folks, but you've also the board at the top. Their share price is going to be very much be driven by the public perception and the opinion as to how good is this company? Do we want to invest in that company as a whole? Because why would you want to invest in an asset manager or a pension fund who really hasn't taken into account any of the climate-related physical risks or the transition risks that are on their doorstep? Because when it does go wrong, they will be the first ones to suffer. Forget the stuff they've invested in. They themselves will struggle. So it should be coming from the top, but you'll also get it on the coalface as a client-facing member of staff as well.
Who do you think, in your opinion, Charlotte, embraces these initiatives the fastest, I would say? Is it on one side or one hand, almost the companies that call it too big to fail, the banks, the Goldman Sachs, the Coca-Cola, the GE as well? Or is it mostly a mid-sized company, which can be, I don't know, like an automotive supplier, it's kind of like supplier to the automotive industry, supplier to the transport industry or the logistic industry? Who do you think today really has that kind of a huge, I would say, appetite for these initiatives?
Two-pronged, I think. That yes, you have the end corporates who are under significant pressure to deliver sustainable, future-proof products and services that don't have any negative externalities within the society as a whole. yes, there's that element of pressure. But again, there is this element of there are more and more, and particularly the millennials are really driving ethical investments and responsible investing. And that's a new group that we're going to see who are driving the demand. And they will want to start investing their money. And there are so many new platforms coming up for investments that are decentralized investments, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're going to want to put their money in ethical projects. And it doesn't have to be, simple public equities. It can be thematic funds, water funds, renewable clean tech funds. Folks want to get a return, right? And so they're going to start, they've definitely, we've got a broader, more savvy investor growing up rather than the traditional, we put the majority in our public equities, a little bit in fixed income and go from there. So yeah, you've got the corporates who do need to address their products, their services to make sure that they're future-proofing. But there is that demand and that drive coming from the investors themselves, particularly those millennials, particularly in the US as well.
And these millennials are not necessarily, I would say, the second generation wealth. People who have seen their parents, grandparents build up these, companies, etc., and say, okay, well, now it's time to do business in a different way. They can also come from, typical tech industry, startups industry, scale-ups, etc., that are in the US. Correct?
Absolutely.
One element, Charlotte, that I wanted to mention today is almost the link between, and this is not something I've seen a lot in the different comms and different publications and different reports that are out there, which is also the impact of actually setting up a powerful ESG initiative and its effect on the employees of that same company. So there's a lot of some debates and report and data about companies that are usually best place to work, or best companies to work for, according to whatever ranking, are usually actually outpacing and outperforming the other companies.
Yes.
And the idea here is to kind of understand if today, in these times as well of the Great Resignation, people are trying to kind of like find some sense, meaning into the jobs that they're doing, into the companies they're joining. How powerful can it be for a company to really implement ESG initiative to kind of retain these big talents and big and brilliant people that work for a company?
So I think if a company talks the talk and walks the walk, and they implement these programs for their investments, and they also implement it internally, they're amazing places to work.
Yeah.
And human capital management is so key for any company, and labor standards are crucial. Of course, if you have a happy workforce, you have a more productive workforce. And if you give your employees a reason to have a purpose and a passion, rather than coming to work every day, switching on their computer, rather than doing that, you give them the underlying goal of, if we reach these targets, we will do X, Y, and Z to invest in this thematic water fund, or we will invest in this process, or we will set up this new program, this new foundation. It definitely, of course it's going to motivate people, particularly post-pandemic, where everybody seems to be interacting with everybody in a much, much different way. We all look at each other differently. I think we are becoming way more inclusive thanks to the pandemic. We just seem to enjoy interacting with each other again. So giving human beings a purpose that goes beyond switching on their PC every day and making a quick buck, and giving them something that's actually changing people's lives in developing countries is huge. Absolutely huge. And one of these things, we see the blue economy as a key one. The blue economy is something that, we know we've got water scarcity. We know we've got to change the way we treat our oceans.
Yeah.
But there are now these amazing initiatives that are looking at doing that for developing coastal sites. It's amazing. It's changing people's lives, and it gives people a refreshed perspective and a renewed vigor on going to work, I personally think.
Okay, now I'm going to ask a controversial question, Charlotte.
Have to answer
it? Well, we see a lot of ESG initiatives out there. What is the thing that makes you in a way, say, okay, this is actually rock solid, and this is just greenwashing.
So in terms of the products and the...
Yeah.
So ESG is an interesting one because you can invest in problematic companies and problematic or controversial sin stocks and sectors, tobacco, munitions, gambling. People won't necessarily, ESG doesn't mean excluding those. ESG means still investing in them because we know we might need them, or we do need them. But it's also about what the companies might put back. So the greenwashing concept, there is a lot of that going on where they say they're doing at least, we do this X, Y, Z. For me, it's about you have to really look underneath at the actual companies. And I think you can only do that if you know how to do it, if that makes sense. If you've not been trained or you don't have the idea how to actually integrate ESG into your process, you're not going to know where to start. But if you can come up with your own scoring system and you can do your own, materiality mapping, we call it materiality mapping, where you look at a sector, you look at a country, look at a company, and you figure out all those controversial areas, how bad are they? And what are they doing to counter that? You can get around greenwashing that way. But there is a lot of greenwashing going on. There's a lot of stuff being sold just to jump on the bandwagon. There's a lot of consultants out there jumping on the bandwagon who don't necessarily truly understand the actual process in the minutiae of detail. A lot of symposiums at a very high level, but don't really go into the practicality.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this. And now let's talk about the some current trends that you're seeing right now within the ESG sector. We've seen, first of all, one of the main trends, which is the kind of the regulation, this kind of changing regulation around ESG, new texts coming up, new laws coming up, etc., saying, okay, well, this is how we're going to codify almost this way of doing stuff. On the other hand, there are also some almost like some pressure from some organizations. The latest GIEC report was very alarming, and I guess helped a lot of people to start thinking about if you didn't start then, start at least thinking at that moment about what is the vision that we want collectively to achieve for the planet. So there's a lot of, like, right now, pushing, to kind of change, how do we produce energy? How do we do this? How do we do that? Any main trends that you see who's working, almost on day-to-day basis, on the ESG sector, in the ESG sector, any main trends that you see on your side?
Yes, it's interesting. Whenever we think of ESG, we always think of the E in ESG. That's the first thing we go to. Climate change, TCFD, all the initiatives around that. I think that the next big things, though, are going to be social megatrends. The social megatrends, and they're perfect. There's perfect timing to do it.
What are the social megatrends for you?
So we have things like automation, AI. Yeah. That's a huge social megatrend. That is going to transform people's lives. It's going to absolutely transform people's lives, and different industries across the board. We have things like wealth inequality and mobility and migration. That's having a huge impact on sustainable living. Life expectancy, right? Life expectancy is going up. We've got that, yes, we do have extreme events that are going to impact insurance companies and damage our buildings and flood our towns. But social megatrends, work, people, the way people work is going to change the world and how things, how business is carried out on a day-to-day basis. Infrastructure. If people are migrating, there's going to be huge investment in infrastructure over the next 20, 30 years. So that will be a big area of focus for, are the buildings that are being built, are they meeting the GRESB index requirements? Are they ESG compliant? So yeah, I think definitely the social aspect is going to take off more so than the environmental. Everyone harps on about the environmental. Of course, we've got governance as well. Now we're seeing the effects of negative G, as it were, in terms of what's happening in Russia and Ukraine at the moment, unfortunately, the very sad situation there. If you have a country that has corruption and issues around it, in that sense, that threatens stability of the world. So, I mean, hopefully we'll squash the G elements soon, and we can focus on the social megatrends. But definitely, I think that's the next area of focus.
Yeah, super insightful. Thank you very much, Charlotte. Because indeed, there is a lot of emphasis that is put on the environmental aspect, and we tend sometimes to kind of almost put the social one at the second.
Yeah, we don't
level, but we don't need that. Yeah,
the way people work, how they work, the working conditions, where they live, where they move to, how technology is going to change how we live and work. So, yeah.
Well, super cool chat. A big thank you, Charlotte. We are going to open to the floor for 10 minutes of questions now. Let's switch to the Q&A part. If anyone, for everyone who's listening to us right now on LinkedIn or elsewhere, please feel free to drop your question on the chat box, and we will be happily sharing it with Charlotte, and we'll be answering it. So yeah, feel free to ask any question you want to Charlotte on this Q&A session. And while people are getting warmed up on the Q&A session as well, we will. I have a question for you, Charlotte, when it comes to the kind of the today. When a company wants really to kind of embrace and start setting up some key ESG initiatives, what are the stuff that a CEO or an executive team should look for and should be prepared for? Is it? Yeah.
Well,
go ahead. Sorry
to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
I think there's three key things, right? There's experienced people, or people that at least understand how to implement a program. There's data. And there's platforms internally, and you're going to have to build those. So those are the three key things I think you've got to think of doing. And you're going to need yourself a nice program manager who can then string that all together. So you're going to at least need 4 bodies with 4 different sets of knowledge to start something up and start a little program. But the steps before that, though, are policy. You've got to have policy in place from the top to endorse and support the implementation and the rollout.
Yeah. Okay. And we'll see if there are any questions. Yeah, feel free to, for everyone who's listening to us, to ask any question you wish to Charlotte, and she will be happy to answer it.
Very quiet.
It's a little bit quiet, but I'm going to take on a second question with you, Charlotte. By the time we have a question from the audience, when it comes to like having setting up an initiative that is across a company. For example, I'm thinking about the big companies, the large companies who have a presence in multiple countries, who have different affiliates, etc. What is the best course of action? Is it to kind of like start this initiative at the corporate level, and then have almost what you mentioned earlier? Okay, the interest is coming from the top, and then we're doing the top-down initiative coming from the corporate, and then spreading across the different countries. Or is it better, in your opinion, to kind of like have almost like one country with a proof of concept, showing that it's working, and then after that replicating this to different countries?
I think it very much depends on where those locations are, those office locations are. We've seen that in some instances there are huge cultural differences that impact on what somebody might consider a negative ESG factor versus a positive. And obviously different local environments will have different needs and drivers. There will always be idiosyncratic issues that, whale meat production is a problem in one part of the world and it's not in another. So the other part of the world will focus on other things. So it's like any program you roll out. You have to have a top-down cookie cutter type mold, but you've always got to allow for regional differences and bespoke factors and materiality mappings. You know, if you have a platinum client list, for example, in a huge corporation, you'll have a global client base that, you know, you might have the top 50 clients across a huge bank, but you always have to allow for regional nuances and, you know, in the form of a silver list, something like that. So I would absolutely say, whatever you implement, have a global framework that makes it very aligned across regions, that you absolutely have to account for and, you know, make room for the regional differences, because they will have a huge bearing on local investors. Absolutely.
Great. Well, big thank you, Charlotte. We have a time for one last question. So let's see what the public says. We have a question here from Jin Chang. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jason. Jason is asking a question. Hi, Cynthia. Some portfolio managers. Actually, you know what? Let me put the question directly on the chat here. Voila. So some portfolio managers point out the ESG factor could be contributed to the growth factor. Momentum factor. Do you think ESG has an excellent ex ante alpha in itself?
So when you're going through the process of evaluation, or rather the integration process, you are changing. When you're integrating, you're either changing the valuation factors, so it could be discount models, terminal values, all that good stuff, or you could be actually just changing the financial projections. So do we think ESG investing has ex ante alpha in itself? Potentially, who knows? I don't think we have seen enough. I don't think we have a way, unfortunately, to really truly attribute performance. This is one of the bigger problems, is performance attribution and breaking it down. You can run through and you can do some basic reporting to figure out, by looking at a portfolio of stocks and seeing the returns and the various values-based factors that are there. But in terms of actually attributing back, I think we're still a way away from that. And we probably need a bright, sparky data scientist to help create those analytics platforms to come up with those values, because it's something that's missing. It's certainly nothing you can buy on the market. And this is why, this in itself is one reason why ESG is such an unknown, because everybody does it differently. Nobody really can actually categorically state that certain performance is attributable to certain factors. And it is at the moment, unfortunately, a guessing game. There's very little historical data as well. There's a lack of comparability between the data sources, and there's often gaps as well between asset classes and sectors and regions as well. So until we have a full data set which enables us to capture all those pieces of information, I don't think we can ever really come up with a true performance attribution. So sorry, that's not the answer you want to hear, I'm sure.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Well, we are gonna wrap up now this session. It was really a pleasure to have you today as part of this Rechecks with Me session. So yeah, thank you for everyone who has been joining and everyone who has been interacting with us on the various social media platforms. A big thank you, Charlotte. I will keep you for a second with me on the platform, and I'm looking forward to seeing you maybe soon and having you as well as a guest soon on these Rechecks with Me sessions.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.